I often wonder what the world remembers about me. Do they see a woman, or a warning? Do they whisper my name with disgust, or do they secretly understand the fire that burned inside me? My name is Delilah. And before Samson ever walked into my life, before I became the woman the world calls betrayer, I was just a woman learning to survive in a world ruled by men and fear. The valley where I lived was a place of beauty and danger. Sorek. A stretch of golden land that shimmered under the desert sun. Where vineyards climbed the hills and secrets hid in the shadows. I knew how to read people, how to see desire in their eyes, fear in their tone, greed in their hesitation. I have lived many lives beneath one name. To some, I am the temptress who destroyed the strongest man who ever lived. To others, I am the woman who changed the course of history with nothing more than a whisper. But before all that, I was just a woman, searching for a way to be seen in a world that never truly looked at me, and before the stories painted me as a serpent, I was flesh and breath, a woman of the valley of Sorek, with dreams, hunger, and secrets of my own. The valley was alive with whispers, traders from Ashkelon, soldiers from Gaza, spies who moved like shadows. Men came and went, each chasing something, wine, women, or war. And I learned to watch them all. The way their eyes shifted when they lied, the way their hands trembled when they wanted something they shouldn't, that it was a dance, and I had learned every step. In a place where power belonged to the ruthless, charm became my weapon, and beauty, my shield. I wasn't born rich. But I understood something early: people would pay anything to feel powerful, even if just for a moment. So I listened to their secrets, served them smiles they didn't deserve, and in return, I took pieces of their power, one favor, one glance, one whispered promise at a time. Sometimes I told myself it was survival. Other times, I admitted it, I liked the control. The way men who ruled armies would tremble when I touched their hands, the way silence became my throne. But even in luxury, fear was never far. Our lands were restless. There was talk of a man with strength beyond reason, a warrior of Israel who tore lions apart with his hands. They called him Samson. To some, he was a monster. To others, a savior. To me then, he was just a name that passed through taverns and campfires like smoke. But something in that name stirred me, curiosity, maybe even challenge. I wanted to see the man who made the mighty tremble. I remember the first time I saw him. The sun was fierce that day, burning the valley in gold. He walked like no man I had ever seen, not just strength in his stride, but certainty. The crowd parted as he passed, as though even the air respected him. And yet, when his eyes met mine, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the unsettling realization that this man, this force of nature, had noticed me. For a brief, silent heartbeat, I wasn't the hunter. I was the one being seen. He looked at me like he already knew me, like my name had been written somewhere deep inside him long before we met. No man had ever held my gaze that long. Most looked at me with desire or suspicion, but his stare, it felt like truth. Strong. Quiet. Dangerous, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether to run or stay still. He didn't speak at first. He just watched me, the way a storm studies the land before it breaks. He came to my home days later. No guards. No noise. Just him. He said my name softly, as though he was tasting it. And something inside me trembled, not from fear, but from recognition that I invited him in, and that simple act changed everything. I remember the way his shadow filled my doorway, how the air felt heavier when he stepped inside, every heartbeat sounded louder, every breath felt like a confession. His voice was unlike any I'd ever heard, deep, calm, but laced with something ancient, something divine. He spoke little, but every word carried weight. He told me of battles and betrayals, of strength he didn't fully understand, and when I laughed, he smiled, the kind of smile that made you forget your own games, that scared me more than his power ever could, because suddenly, the hunter in me wanted to be caught. Days turned into nights, and nights into something else entirely. He would visit often, never with words of war, but with stories, laughter, silence. And I found myself memorizing the way his hands moved, the sound of his breathing when he slept. I told myself it was curiosity. But the truth, I was falling for the very man everyone feared. That it wasn't part of the plan, but the heart never asks permission. The first time his hand brushed mine, I forgot every lie I'd ever told. There was no sound, no thought, just that moment that it was power meeting vulnerability, strength meeting silence, and I realized something terrifying. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in control. The world outside vanished, the only thing that existed was the warmth of his touch and the sound of my racing heart. There's a thin line between affection and opportunity, and I learned to walk it with grace. Samson loved deeply, but his heart was unguarded. That he trusted easily, believed fully, and that made him dangerous, not to others, but to himself. I told myself that I was only protecting what I'd built, yet deep down, I knew I was starting to calculate. Love had become a weapon, and I was the one holding it. They came to me one night, the rulers of the land, dressed in fine robes, faces cold and certain. They didn't ask, they offered silver, promises, power. Their voices dripped with temptation, but underneath was threat. They wanted one thing, the secret behind Samson's strength, and they knew I was the only one who could get close enough to find it. That I smiled that night, not because I wanted their silver, but because I wanted to prove I could do what no one else could. They told me he was a threat to everything we stood for, that his strength was rebellion in human form. That I told myself I was doing what I must, that loyalty to my people mattered more than loyalty to one man, but in truth, it wasn't that simple. That I wasn't loyal to anyone, not even myself. The bargain was struck before the words even left my lips. I returned to Samson that night with the same smile he knew, soft, inviting, dangerous. That I lay beside him, tracing circles on his arm, asking where his strength came from. He laughed. He teased. That he told me stories instead of truth, and I laughed too, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, I was studying him, every word, every pause, every breath. That it was no longer love or betrayal. That it was strategy. He told me, tie me with 7 fresh cords, and I will be as weak as any man. I did as he said, but when the Philistines came, he broke them like threads of smoke. And I laughed, pretending to be offended, while my heart raced. That he was too strong, not just in body, but in spirit, and I realized, this would take more than charm. That it would take patience. I grew softer with him, gentler, sweeter, each touch, each word, carefully measured. That he began to believe I wanted his truth because I loved him, not because I was after it, but the truth. Even I started to forget which part of me was real. When you play pretend long enough, it becomes who you are. I asked again. And again, he played me, bind me with new ropes. He said. That I obeyed, waited, tested, and once again, he tore them apart as if they were air. The soldiers fled, and I smiled through my anger, because beneath that smile, I was learning how his heart moved. That I knew one day I would strike perfectly. He started to sense it, my questions, my silences, the way I looked at him too long. Love began to taste like suspicion. I could feel him drifting between affection and doubt, between laughter and warning. But I also knew something deeper. Samson couldn't stay away. Whatever tied him to me was stronger than fear, and that gave me power again. The lords grew impatient. They sent messages, threats, more silver. That I told them to wait, that taming a storm took time, but inside, I was breaking too. Every lie I spoke was carving pieces out of me, yet I couldn't stop, because by then, I needed the victory more than I needed the truth. So one night, I leaned closer than before. My words soft, my voice low. I let my tears fall, real tears. Do you not love me? I whispered. Why do you mock me with lies? And I saw it, The guilt in his eyes, the man who could lift gates from their hinges suddenly looked small, human, torn. That was the night I knew I would win. Not by force, but by the weakness hidden inside love. For days, I had pushed him, gently at first, then with the slow persistence of a wave that never stops kissing the same shore. Each time he lied, I felt the sting of failure, but also something darker, obsession. I needed to know. Not just for the silver they promised me, but for the strange power he carried, the secret that made him untouchable. He laughed at my tears at first, then grew silent. I could see the fatigue in his eyes, the weariness of a man who no longer knew if he was loved or hunted. That night, when I whispered again, my words came wrapped in sorrow. How can you say you love me when your heart is hidden from me? And in that moment, I saw his defenses crumble. He exhaled deeply, the sound heavy like surrender. I could feel it, the moment the strongest man alive broke inside. He told me the truth. Not with pride this time, but with the quiet tone of someone handing over his soul. I listened, barely breathing, as he revealed the one thing that set him apart from every man on earth. I smiled through my tears, but inside, terror clawed at me. I had gotten what I wanted, yet it felt like holding a live flame in my hand. When he fell asleep on my lap, peace washed over his face like a child resting after battle. I brushed his hair back slowly, the same hair that held the mystery of his might. Outside, I had already sent word to the Philistines. They were waiting in the darkness, ready to finish what I had begun. That I told myself this was destiny. That the gods, or perhaps my own fears, had led me here. But as the scissors touched his hair, my heart screamed louder than the blades. The first strand fell. Then another. And another. By the time the seventh lock dropped to the floor, I felt something leave the room, a stillness that felt holy and terrifying all at once. His breath changed, his body seemed lighter, smaller. I touched his face, but it felt like touching an empty shell, and then I called out, the words I had used before, words that once made him rise. He opened his eyes, confused, then terrified. He tried to stand, but his strength had vanished like smoke. The Philistines burst through the door. I stepped back as chaos erupted, metal clanging, men shouting that I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I had become a spectator in my own betrayal. They seized him, bound him, blinded him. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. When they dragged him away, I stood in silence. The coins they had promised me clinked in a sack beside my feet, heavy, mocking, alive with guilt. I had it all now. Wealth. Power. Freedom. But I had lost something I didn't even know I wanted, the one man who had ever loved me without demand or fear. That night, I counted the silver, and hated the sound of it. They called me clever. They called me victorious. But no one saw the emptiness that followed me after that night. His voice haunted me in my dreams, not his anger, but his gentleness. The way he'd call my name, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, that I had betrayed a man who would have died for me, and somehow, that made my victory feel like death. Days turned into weeks. The city buzzed with celebration, they sang of his defeat, they toasted to my name. But in every song, I heard chains. They said he now turned a mill in prison, blind and broken, mocked by the very men he once terrified. I tried to convince myself I didn't care. I told myself it was his destiny, not my fault. But every night, the echo of those chains clattered inside me, louder than the coins, louder than the cheers. One morning, I caught my reflection in the bronze mirror. My face looked the same, but my eyes, they weren't mine anymore. There was something empty there, something hollow where my pride used to live. Beauty had been my weapon, but now it felt like a curse. For the first time, I realized that I had destroyed the only man who ever saw me for more than what I appeared to be. When I walked through the marketplace, I heard them whisper. "That's her," they'd say. "The woman who brought down the mighty one." Some looked at me with admiration, others with disgust, but none of them knew what it felt like, to hold greatness in your hands and crush it with your own fear. They saw victory. I lived the guilt. Sometimes, when the nights grew long and the air too quiet, I could still hear him, his laughter, his teasing tone, his strength wrapped in gentleness. It wasn't his strength that haunted me, it was his kindness. That I had betrayed a man who never lifted his hand against me, not even when he knew I had deceived him, and that mercy was heavier than any punishment I could bear. Then one day, word spread through the city, a collapse, a tragedy. The temple of Dagon had fallen. Thousands were dead, including him. They said his strength had returned one last time. I stood still as the news sank in, that the man I betrayed had died, bringing his enemies down with him, and in that moment, I realized something cruel. Even blinded, even broken, he was still greater than all of us. History would remember him, the strong man who fell for a woman's charm. But no one would remember me, the woman who couldn't live with what she'd done. They painted me as wicked, but none of them ever saw the tears, the nightmares, the endless replay of that night. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe I didn't. But every legend has two sides, and mine was never told. If anyone ever speaks my name again, let them remember this: power without love destroys, and love without truth poisons. I had both in my hands once, and I lost them both. Samson's fall wasn't just his story. It was mine too. Because sometimes, the strongest man and the most beautiful woman are both victims of pride, of fear, of the choices they couldn't undo. Now I live with silence, the kind that doesn't fade with time. I've learned that love built on deceit cannot last, and guilt is a shadow that never sleeps. Maybe someday, when history speaks of Samson, someone will remember me, not as the temptress, not as the villain, but as a woman who made a mistake that echoed forever. Until then, I fade quietly into the stories told by others, the woman history forgot. If this story touched your heart, then you already know, every voice carries a story worth hearing. Here on this channel, we bring those forgotten voices from the Bible to life, one story at a time. Stories of love, betrayal, courage, and redemption, stories like Delilah's, that still speak to us today. Your support keeps this vision alive. If you believe in what we're building, if you want to see more women of faith, more hidden lessons, more powerful storytelling, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share this video. Every click, every comment, every share helps this small but growing channel reach more hearts around the world. You are not just watching, you're part of this journey. Together, we're keeping these stories alive. Until next time. Stay inspired. Stay faithful. And never forget, every story has a voice, it just needs someone to tell it.